Oh my, I've got to come up with it.
Did you get a cold?
Yeah, I picked up a cold yesterday, and
The weather is such.
yeah,
I didn't get one because I had one for. I picked one up down in Delaware. I was lecturing at the University of Delaware just 2 weeks.
Hello, welcome to Black Horizons. I'm your host, Hamid Rasheed. This afternoon, we're going to be talking with a very special guest in the person of Dr. Alfred Lilienthal. We're going to be talking to Dr. Lilienthal, I'm sorry, about...
As long as you don't call me David, it's all right.
Right. About his publication, The Zionist Connection, and the situation in the Middle East. Dr. Lilienthal is in Halifax, I understand, as the guest of the Canadian or Canada-Palestine Association. I heard you speak last night at the McGinnis Room at Dalhousie University. I enjoyed your lecture very much. I understand, Doctor, that this is part of a Canadian tour that you've been involved in concerning your book, The Zionist Connection.
Well, this is separate, but I did have a Canadian tour earlier this year. In March and April, I visited 5 Canadian cities and tried to bring the book to the attention of the Canadian people, have to overcome the pressures of the Zionist machine. I'm glad to say that 3 weeks after I left, it suddenly appeared on the bestseller list in Montreal, which after all is the stronghold of our friends the Bronfmans, and the Zionists are very strong there. I was frightfully disappointed, though, to discover in June and July that my publishers in New York bowed to pressure with the permission of the Canadian distributors McClellan Stewart, and it's very difficult to get the book here because they refused to go into a third printing. This is suppression of the book in the same way Dr. A.C. Forrest's book was suppressed. It became a bestseller, so who knows what's going to happen to the Zionist Connection when we get this ironed out.
I might add that I have a personal experience with that. I had the opportunity to be in Toronto this weekend past, and thought I would use that as an opportunity to get your book, knowing that you'd be coming on our program today. And I must say that I had considerable difficulty in locating a copy of the book in some of the better-known bookstores in the Toronto area, where one would expect to find a book such as your own present. I did eventually find a copy, but I guess I spent the good part of a day.
And this is the subject that I would say is the #1 subject, because the Zionist Connection is even part of the Iranian story.
Right. What I'd like to do before we move on to go into the substance of the book, and that is the Middle East question, is I'd just like to, for those people who might be interested in getting a copy of the book, it's a fairly large book, but it does read very easily, I might say.
Thank you.
Copies of the book are available, I understand, from, I have an address here, the Middle East Perspective, 850 7th Avenue, New York. At $19.95 US, or I think that probably interprets to roughly, breaks down to $25 Canadian. I think that's what
It's a lot of money, and I've been trying to prevail upon my publishers, and this is why we've gone unfortunately into legal action involving $3.5 million over their failure not only to distribute the book in Canada and the United States, but to put it into paperback, to translate it into French so that the French-speaking people here in Europe and elsewhere in the world can read it, but they've been frightened. This is the Zionist Connection. I outlined in the book, when I thought the book was published, I had refuted my very words, but in the end, the book is right, and Lilienthal proves to be wrong. Right. You can't get a book against Zionism before the American people and the Canadian people without tremendous difficulties.
I want to talk some more about that, the suppression of information, a little later in the program. But before we move into the discussion of the Middle East question itself, Doctor, you're a member of the Jewish community. We've read a lot of late about the the so-called tensions between the black and Jewish communities in the United States, which has been heightened in recent months as a result of the Andrew Young resignation, which is an outgrowth of developments in the Middle East. From your vantage point, is this the tensions that we read about here in Canada, is this a real thing? What's been your experience in this regard? What have you observed vis-a-vis the black community, the Jewish community in the United States?
I think it's very real because the black community, out of sympathy for the Jewish oppressed peoples, so-called oppressed in the United States where they never have been oppressed like the blacks were, went along with Zionist goals and aspirations and generally supported the pro-Israel, pro-Zionist position. With the resignation of Andrew Young, they began to do some second thinking, which increased as Jesse Jackson and Mr. Lowry and other blacks visited the Middle East, and for the first time they woke up and said, my God, there is a Palestinian position. So I think there's a great shift in black sentiment in the United States, which is going to be a very important factor because it will tend to balance the concentration of attention by the politicians on the Jewish vote. They've got to think of the black vote. I don't know how long this concentration of the blacks on the Palestine problem will persist. It will depend on how skillfully anti-Zionists and pro-Arabs continue in their approach to the black community, not only through their leadership, but to the masses. I hope to do some speaking myself before black groups and explain to them what is Zionism, what is Judaism, the vast differences between the two, and that they're no less a supporter of Jews as individuals and a sympathizer with the victims of persecution if they also say, my God, the Palestinians have been persecuted and now being persecuted on the West Bank and in Gaza. Right. So I think the rift between the Jewish and black community, which has been growing over other problems, now lights onto the Palestine problem.
I suppose it would be reasonable to expect, given the experience that you've had with your book and the kinds of pressures that the community, the Zionists, are able to exert, that one could expect, as long as blacks remain, take a very visible position on this issue, that they can expect to have domestic repercussions. A number of the black groups, for example, are funded by Jewish groups in the United States.
Yes, exactly. And there have been threats already that some of this funding will be withdrawn, and the Arabs said that they would make up for it, but it's a very difficult problem. It's a problem that's going to be in constant flux, as far as I can see, over the next several months, and it'll be mixed up with the efforts of the politicians to satisfy both groups and get the votes of both. Whether they can, that's another question.
Right, I want to talk to you about that a little bit more in terms of the voting system in the United States. But for now, I'd like to, in this part of the country, one of the things I find is that there's a lack of understanding as to the basic issues in the Middle East situation as it relates to the Palestinians in the State of Israel. As simply stated as possible, how would you define the current crisis in the Middle East?
I would define the current crisis in the Middle East as a struggle of the Palestinian people to gain the right of self-determination. When the Balfour Declaration was issued as a colonial measure by the British government to win sympathy of the world for a losing British effort in World War I, the population of Palestine was 93% non-Jewish, that is Christian and overwhelmingly Muslim, and only 7% Jewish. In 1947, as a result of the Nazi criminalities, as a result of the Holocaust, there was established the Zionist State of Israel. It was not intended to be an exclusivist state. It was intended a state to be set up for the Jews who escaped Hitler, the small number, only 350,000 refugees who went to Palestine, was the result of the Hitler tragedy. But with the establishment of the State of Israel at the same time was the expulsion of the Palestinian population. The overwhelming, not 93% in 1947, but 66% of Palestine were either Christian or Muslim Arabs. And with Israel's establishment in 1948, these people were forced out or feared out. The advancing Israeli army, the massacre of 254 women and children at Deir Yassin in April 1948 led to the exodus of the Palestinians. And mind you, in the state envisioned by the United Nations under their resolution of November the 29th, the population was almost 50-50, 50% Arab and 50% Jewish within the Israeli state itself. Well, the Israelis were worried about that. The higher growth birth rate of the Palestinians would be a threat to them. And so it was up to them to get rid of the Palestinians who were there. And this they did through, as I say, the Deir Yassin, which Mr. Begin boasts of, this massacre of Deir Yassin. He calls it a battle, but every international observer from the International Red Cross through Jacques de Renier, who was the representative of the International Red Cross, through Collins and LaPierre in O Jerusalem have testified, and such Jewish historians as the Kimshis themselves have said that this was a massacre to instill fear, to result in the exodus, to give Israel a clear majority of Jews and not to be worried about the increasing birth rate on the Israeli side. So since 1948, they started off with a state given them by the United Nations resolution, and we're not even questioning the right at this moment of the United Nations to partition against the majority of the people, with about 58% of the land, which with the 67 war, they wind up with all of Palestine, parts of Syria, parts of Jordan, the West Bank and Gaza, that is, and with the Sinai. We've had, in this period since 48, we've had 4 regional wars, 3 near big power confrontations. Millions of people have been harassed, removed, their houses destroyed. There has been acts of terrorism committed on both sides, but it all starts with the beginning injustice. People don't never want to go back to the beginning.
Quite simply stated then, would it be an oversimplification to say that if you consider this kind of analogy, we had a person who had a home. You had a third party, in this case the United States, who basically said to another community of people, the Israelis, okay, I'm going to give you, in fact, I'm going to give you this home. It doesn't belong to me, but I'm going to let you occupy this home. The Israelis come in, occupy the home, evict the owners, the legitimate owners of the home, and have set about taking title to the is that
that is, and the United States motivated in part certainly by a knowable motivation of humanitarianism. These people saw supposedly 6 million wiped out under the Nazi Holocaust, and therefore why not make up to them by giving them something that didn't belong to them. No one said, for example, let's settle them in Lake Louise and Banff, yes, or in the unpopulated areas of the U.S. Midwest, but let's give them Palestine. I mean, Arnold Toynbee talked about that in quoting from St. Francis of Assisi, how wrong this was, and quoted a parable from St. Francis. And other people have pointed out of trying to rectify one wrong and have a third innocent party make up for what the Nazis did to the Jews.
Right. Just before we go into some of the more substantive issues involved, a lot of people in the West, rightly or wrongly, take the attitude, the Middle East crisis, 6,000 miles away. So what? What's the relevance to us? Why should we be concerned? How would you respond to a person who took that kind of position?
Well,
what is the relevance of the Middle East question?
Both on a selfish and an unselfish basis. First, on a very pragmatic basis, the question of oil, energy in the United States is very important. And I noticed that the prime ministers of your various provinces were meeting with the new Prime Minister.
Just this week.
Just this week, and trying to figure out an energy answer to your own energy problem. Heretofore, you had no energy problem, but you will rely also on the import of oil from outside your own lands and the pricing of oil in relation to the world oil markets. So that is a very important thing, not only oil, but the relationship of Canada to the Arab world with its petrodollars, to see to it that Canada, in terms of international trade, receives its fair share of petrodollars. And when Joe Clark, in the course of the election, made the ill-advised promise to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, he recanted and changed his mind when he began to think of the national interest. So I say that one reason it impinges on the average Canadian is in terms of interests, also in terms of the moral stand. The Canadians, like the Americans, are very moral-minded people in terms of equity, of right and wrong. And myself as a Jew, the question of righteousness, as it should be with all Jews, should be very important. For if you don't believe in righteousness, said Micah and the other great Jewish teachers, prophets, there is nothing left to Judaism but an ethical standard. And if you remove that, what's left?
I'm going to cut you off there, Doctor. And one of the things I noted with interest in your comments last night, I think most people, or a lot of people, might equate Judaism with Zionism. And you were careful last night in your remarks to make the distinction. You're a Jew, and I think you used the phrase that you can be anti-Zionist without being anti-Jew.
Anti-Semitic, right, exactly. It's very, very important that people understand. However, Judaism may have been corrupted by Zionists to mean a political support of Israel, a political movement. And my friend Moshe Menuhin has written this dramatically in his book, The Decadence of Judaism in Our Times. That is the father of the famed violinist Yehudi Menuhin. Zionism is not Judaism. Zionism is a purely political movement designed to bring a political state into being and to support, to give every kind of succor and aid diplomatic to that state, and to make it incumbent to a Jew, so long as he wishes to remain a so-called loyal Jew, to bow to the wishes of the state of Israel, right or wrong, setting up in terms of fact, under the guise of humanitarianism, under the guise of religion, a dual loyalty. And we saw it last night, where these people, for the moment, forgot that they were Canadians and that there are Canadian interests involved, and they shouted out in terms of their being Jews. It has nothing to do with religion. Most of the people, the sad fact is that a majority of people in Israel have no religious ties. They are either agnostic or atheist, and those that have the strongest religious ties, the Natura Carta, are violently opposed to the creation of a Zionist state and to the existing Zionist state, because they say that they're sure we are to have a state, but it's to be led by the return of the Messiah. And for one reason or another, they don't see Mr. Menachem Begin or one of his predecessors as that Messiah.
Well, I think this is interesting. I think one of the things that I get from reading your book is that, well, I get a lot of information, first of all, that I hadn't had heretofore, and I found it interesting how, and I'd like for you to comment on this, how we can get such distorted information here in the West. Why we only get one side. If you were to talk to most people here, they talk, for example, about the Palestinians and refer to them as terrorists, but we hear very little about the kinds of situations that are happening in South Lebanon as a result of the indiscriminate bombing of schools and civilians by the State of Israel. How is it that we're able to have such manipulation of information? What contributes to
Two factors. First, we have the most skilled propaganda machine in the world, namely the Zionists. You have to credit them with this. They're exceedingly well organized. As soon as they hear that I'm going to be on a television station 2 weeks ago, they call up and demand equal time. And instead of my being interviewed at CBC television, it's going to be a debate. They're omnipotent. They're all over, ubiquitous. And they're very careful. And they have excellent public relations. They have used and misused and exploited the Holocaust. Not that all of us don't deprecate and condemn the acts of Nazi bestiality, but to try to relate the Nazi acts against the Jews in Germany to the Palestinian demand for a home and the right of freedom and self-determination is utterly ridiculous. So on the one hand, you have a very, very strong Zionist machine who knows public relations, and the Arabs who disdain the use of public relations have not mastered this technique and almost refuse to try it. And then you have the domination in the United States particularly, and to some extent also in Canada, of the media by the Zionists through the Zionist Connection. Their Zionist Connection through the use of advertisers, pressures, organized Jews all over, the Zionist lobby, which is strong in Canada, but much, much stronger in the United States. The fact that, like in the United States, we have very, very strong supporters of Zionism who appear on television frequently, like Barbara Walters. Well, you have your Barbara Fromm here.
Yes.
You have these people who do not hesitate to present their dichotomous bias based on their affiliation, no matter how small it may be, with Judaism, and to use the television and radio to present one side. And if they don't, then they're accused of being anti-Semitic. The labeling or advertising is withdrawn. 99% of the time is given to one side. When you, by dint of perseverance, manage to get 1%, then you've got to divide that 1% and make it 99.5% to 0.5%.
It's interesting, this sophistication and control of the media is also accompanied by very astute political moves. I always find it fascinating how a group has been able to exercise such influence, all out of proportion to its numbers. How they've been able to, those who are familiar with the way in which the State of Israel came into being, how they were able to move from a national homeland concept into a state concept.
Right,
it's very interesting.
right.
You made some comments last night in terms of how the Jewish lobby is able to compromise politicians in the United States. I'd wonder if you could comment on that.
Yes, because several factors. One is that with the exception of all the Kennedys, more than 50% of the money contributed to presidential campaigns have come from Jewish sources. Number two, the method by which we elect our presidents in the United States, which we are now beginning our quadrennial presidential sweepstakes, we do not elect by popular vote. We elect by the Electoral College system, whereby a state's Electoral College vote goes as a unit. To be more explicit, let us say in 1976, this is hypothetical, Mr. Carter received 2 million votes in the state of New York, and Mr. Ford received 1,999,999 votes. Mr. Carter would get all of New York's state's 43 electoral votes, and Mr. Ford would be shut out completely. You then can see how a small, well-organized minority that threatens both parties to throw the swing vote to their side can be all-powerful. I mean, because they can elect the president. This is what happened in the United States. Mr. Carter won a majority of the large states in which Jews are concentrated and was elected president. And there are 85% of American Jews located in 16 cities, which happen to be in 6 states, with an electoral college vote of 178 votes, and it takes only 270 to elect the President of the United States. So these large states, where the swing vote is important, fall prey to the pandering of the Jewish Zionist vote. And that's where their tremendous power and influence lie.
Would it be fair to say that this ability to influence the American political system has been one of the single most important factors in influencing the United States foreign policy as it relates to the State of Israel?
No question about that. Going back to the very beginning, I remember back in 1946, before the State of Israel was created, and I tell this in the Zionist Connection as I did in What Price Israel, that both sides were bartering for the vote in the congressional election of '46. And how was it decided? Mr. Taft was one of the three candidates leading candidates for the Republican and Democratic nominations, spoke in Ohio, and he won the sweepstake by saying, I want 200,000 visas immediately for entrance into Palestine. In New York, Mr. Dewey had only asked for 150,000 visas, and Mr. Truman had asked for 175,000 until the senior senator from Ohio won by asking for 200,000. He didn't get the nomination, but throughout the campaign in '48, 2 years later, between Dewey and Truman, the question of who can do more for Israel has always been uppermost in the minds of candidates.
Well, we only have a limited time left, good doctor. We have less than 5 minutes left in the program, and there are so many areas we'd like to cover, but in the time remaining, there are two areas particularly I'd like to touch on. The one relates to this whole concept of the Palestinians as terrorists. I'd like for you to get a comment on that. And finally, I'd like to close off the program. I was fascinated last night by your remarks in terms of the solution as you see it to the Middle East question, the Zionization of the State of Israel. But first of all, I'd like to get your comment. What about this image that we have here in the West of the Palestinians as being terrorists and the Israelis as being people who are...
There's been a double standard used by the press. When Begin did his terrorism and blew up the King David Hotel as the head of the Irgun in 1948-49, 46-47, and hung the British sergeants and led the massacre of Deir Yassin, which led to the Exodus, he was a freedom fighter. And
ironically, now he's a Nobel Prize winner.
A Nobel Prize winner, ironically, just as ironic as Mr. Kissinger is also a Nobel Prize winner, and Mr. Sadat. The double standard has been used. We hear nothing or very little about the bombing in South Lebanon, the bombing of innocent refugee camps of Nabatea, the phosphorus bombing of children, Lebanese and Palestinian, where we hear a lot.
What struck me about that too, Doctor, if I could cut you off, is the fact that most of this devastation is caused by weaponry that is supplied
by the United States. That's the horrible thing. Paid for with tax-exempt dollars by the hard-earned American taxpayer and the Canadian taxpayers sending money. We heard last night of a village that was leveled to the ground, and there is a Canadian forest now in its place, where once there was a Palestinian village. And this is done with innocent, well-meaning contributions from U.S. principally, and also from Canadian contributors.
What about the solution, Doctor?
The solution quickly is two states, a Palestinian state, West Bank and Gaza, side by side by an Israeli state, but that Israeli state must be an Israeli state rather than a Jewish state. It must de-Zionize. It must treat all its citizens in law equally, Arabs and Jews. And within the Palestinian state, whatever Jewish settlers remain, they should be treated equally, so that eventually the Jews and the Arabs, who got along for centuries before the advent of Zionism turned their relations slightly cool, could resume their coexistence together in two parallel states. And eventually, maybe in 40, 50 years, inshallah, as they say in Arabic, Allah be willing, that two states will coalesce into one. But there must be equality, even-handedness on the part of the Canadian and the U.S. governments to achieve this kind of a solution.
Doctor, unfortunately, we've run out of time. I want to thank you.
The half hours passed quickly.
Passed very quickly. I want to thank you for appearing on our program. Our subject today has been the Zionist Connection, a book published by Dr. Alfred Lilienthal. Our topic, we've been talking about the situation in the Middle East. Dr. Lilienthal is a member of the Jewish community. He's an author, an historian, a graduate of Cornell University and Columbia Law School. He's published a number of publications on the Middle East, What Price Israel, There Goes the Middle East, The Other Side of the Coin, Which Way to World Government, Israel's Flag Is Not Mine. As mentioned in our program, Dr. Lilienthal makes annual tours to the Middle East. He's prepared a documentary film, The Turbulent Middle East, and he's currently the publisher and editor of the Middle East perspective. Dr. Lilienthal, thank you very much for appearing on Black Horizons. That's our program for today. Thank you for watching.
Thank you for allowing me to be here.
Hello, welcome to another Black Horizons program. I'm your host, Hamid Rasheed. In our program today, we're going to be talking about the Lake Major watershed issue and the community development plans that have grown out of the activities surrounding the Lake Major watershed issue. I have with me on the program today to explain the community development plans for the communities affected by the watershed question Mr. Arnold Johnson, the chairman of the North Preston Ratepayers Association and a member of the Lake Major Watershed Joint Action Committee, and H.J. Porter of H.J. Porter and Associates, who is the plan consultant who's worked closely with the communities in evolving the community development plan. Before we get into the plan itself, for the benefit of our viewers, perhaps Mr. Johnson, you might explain a bit about the watershed issue. What is the watershed issue and the Lake Major watershed issue, and when did it first start, or how did it come about?
Well, it came about in the early 1977. Community residents were complaining, in North Preston were complaining of not being able to get a permit to build homes, and that they would go to the county for a permit. The county would send them to the city of Dartmouth, and just getting a runaround. And one gentleman in particular came to me and asked me what could I do or what about it, because I just left county council. And I went to the county building inspector and asked him what about it, and from then on he said, well, they're enforcing the bylaw of was made some 23 years ago of the watershed, and they could not get
a bylaw. There was a bylaw that was passed
in about I don't know the exact date, about 23 years to 1977.
Right. And how was it that the bylaw that had been passed some 27 years previous, what circumstances caused the bylaw to become operative in, say, 1977?
It was never active until 1977 by the county or the city. It was never enforced until then. I think it was because of the buildings in the community of North Preston had increased, and they thought it would be some threat to the water in the Long Lake, which feeds into Lake Major, and they was enforcing the bylaw.
Prior to that time, as I understand the history of it, the city of Dartmouth became concerned that the building and development as they saw it in the Preston area would perhaps have an adverse effect on the Lake Major watershed. Prior to that time, was it common knowledge in the communities that these black communities were in fact living on a watershed, or was it a surprise to learn that?
It was a surprise. They didn't know they were living on the watershed. It was never proclaimed as a watershed to the residents. They didn't realize it was a watershed.
Right. So it must have been quite a shock for the people then to find out all of a sudden in 1977, here this area has been used as a watershed, never been designated, and then all of a sudden people are trying to prevent you from building on this so-called watershed area. What did you do? What did the communities do to come to grips with this problem?
Well, first it started in the community of North Preston. I was chairman of the Ratepayers Association at that time, and after getting all the information that I could collect from the county and referring back to that bylaw, I called it a meeting of the community and updated them on what was taking place and get information where we should go from there. And the community of North Preston was organized to fight this with the city of Dartmouth, and about a week or so later, other communities became to be involved. Cherrybrook and East Preston and Lake Major, they are partially on the watershed, and then a joint action committee of the 4 communities were formed about 2 weeks after we were organized. And this meeting was called in the Graham Creighton High School in Westfall, and the residents band together and formed the joint action committee, which is in force now.
Now, the Joint Action Committee, which was comprised, as you say, of representatives from the communities that were affected by the watershed question, what steps did the Joint Action Committee take to deal with this bylaw that was, causing difficulty with getting the building permits?
We had meetings with the City of Dartmouth and the County of Halifax. We engaged a solicitor, and through several meetings with them, we went to proceed to have this bylaw discontinued.
Right.
Rescinded.
And were you successful in getting the bylaw repealed?
Yes, we were very successful in having the bylaw repealed after quite a debate for several weeks. I can recall we had a group of citizens, or a very large crowd, gathered at the county building when this was presented to a county council to repeal this bylaw, and of course the results were that the bylaw was repealed.
How do we get from the watershed into the development of community development plans? And I guess perhaps what I'm asking is, maybe Mr. Porter, how did you get involved in the process?
We got involved in the process as a result of an identification, I think, by provincial and municipal levels of government that the potential conflict, at least at that time, between community development, stability of communities, and good quality water for either community water supply or a larger metropolitan area water supply, such as the city of Dartmouth, that if there were conflicts, that these had to be resolved. In other words, the communities, I think it was accepted in an early stage that they had a right to continue to exist and to grow and expand, and at the same time there was obviously a desire to maintain good quality water. So therefore, those 2 levels of government called upon consultants to get involved in the study, and I guess very simply, we were the consultant firm that was chosen at that time.
Right. I want to come back to you, Mr. Porter, and talk a bit about what you've been doing since you became involved. But before I do that, I'm interested about the getting more detail, and as I'm sure our viewers are, about the Joint Action Committee. What objectives did the Joint Action Committee have for itself, Mr. Johnson, after you were successful in getting the offending bylaw repealed? I guess after that you were able to continue with your building. What then did the Joint Action Committee involve itself in, and what has been the relationship of the committee, say, to Mr. Porter, who's been doing the Joint Action, or been doing the community, or trying to get the community development plans?
Well, the relation between the community and the Porter Company has been very good. We have community workers who are set up, and they are residents of the community, and they are working with liaison persons with the Porter Company and the community, and they interview the residents, the people of the community, and to find out information what they would like to see in the community development plan, and they relay the information back to the Porter Company. There are newsletters going out to the communities, or the results, up to date on what's taking place in the plan. There are also meetings.
So the Joint Action Committee then has more or less been responsible for coordinating the input with the activities of the plan consultant and the community, and getting feedback to Mr. Porter, who's doing the plan?
Oh yes.
What do you see as being the importance of the plan to the communities? It seems that with the repeal of the bylaw, Section 28 of the building bylaw of Halifax County, that the problem would have been solved. So a lot of people I know have thought that. How did you, the plan itself, what do you see as being the importance of the plan to the communities?
Well, it's an immediate and a long-range plan for the community where we can grow and develop in the future, not just for now. Having the plan repealed, that was an issue for now, but it did point in how we would grow or develop in the future. This plan is...
Right. So then what has really happened here then, as I see it, and correct me if I'm wrong, as a result of the awareness that came about on the part of area residents. Once the bylaw, the offending bylaw was repealed, then this whole question of the future growth and development of the community became very important, and that the plan is attempting to sort of allow the residents to express, you know, how they would want to see the communities grow and development.
Yes.
Grow and develop so that you won't find yourself perhaps in a situation that the community was in when the...
Well, that was very much on the residents' mind, that they didn't want to go about 10 or 15 years down the road and they were in the same situation. They want something substantial, and this plan should bring out something substantial. It's our views, our ideas that we can give to the engineer to...
Right, well, I'd like to pass over then to you, back to you, Hugh, and perhaps go into a little more detail, a little more specifics about the plan. What are the issues that the plan attempts to address?
Well, in a general sense, and I think Arnold has identified that there is a short-term or immediate perspective. I'm going back at least a year, if not beyond, when the watershed issue arose. And one of the prime objectives of the plan is to resolve any conflicts between watershed management and communities remaining in the watershed as viable communities that can continue to grow, expand, and develop. In addition to that, and I'm not necessarily indicating that that is the only priority. In fact, I think I'm not putting these in any order of priority necessarily. Looking at the long-term aspects, it was identified that there was a need to develop a plan, a long-term plan for physical improvement of the communities, considering such elements as recreation needs, transportation, land use, the ability to find or secure land on which building could take place, a range of needs of that type, which it was necessary to take a long-term look at and try to provide a framework or a direction for. Early in the process, when we first started to look at some of the physical considerations, such as the ones I just mentioned and the watershed question, it became obvious that this plan must take also an orientation toward human resource development as well. And it was felt that to do physical...
When you say human resource development, perhaps for some of our viewers who might not be familiar with that phrase, I guess you would be talking about development of people. The human resources, the people in the community.
Yes,
yeah,
basically, right. So the development of the people became a very important issue, and it was realized that really to do only physical planning, such as to, for example, perhaps build houses or improve roadways, that type of thing, was not enough by itself. It might be half of the total question, but the people development was also most important. So the study began to put more emphasis on people development, and that was perhaps a bit of a departure from the normal type of plan that is often drawn up in the province of Nova Scotia, which has primarily a physical orientation. And that human resource development, I think, addressed issues all the way from increasing the level of skills, general level of education, examining the present education system, and also trying to look at opportunities for job creation, surprisingly enough, even within the community area, in terms of the ability to take advantage of some of the natural resources in the area from the job creation point of view. Natural resources, for example, being the fact that there is good quality agricultural land within the area, and that good quality agricultural land may present an opportunity for economic endeavors and various types of agricultural pursuits.
One area that we chatted about before going on air was this whole question of the opening up of a road between the existing communities of North Preston and East Preston. I'd like to go back to Mr. Johnson for a moment and have you perhaps explain how this came about, the road, the connector road between, I think it's Upper Governor Street and the community of North Preston. What was the idea behind suggesting this road?
Well, this road had been asked to be opened up or connected years ago. I can recall when it was opened up and traffic would drive through it. That was trucks hauling wood, lumber, etc. But it finally went to just disused, the ruts and the rocks, and it's finally closed. You can't get a vehicle through it at all now. But the community of North Preston would like it open up because it gives us a second access over the community. There's only a one-way street into the community. Through this plan, some of the reasons we would like to have this road connected is it has some very good agricultural land, and there could be homes built, and the community could expand, give the community a chance to expand, the two communities a chance to expand, and also build houses, you know.
Right. I guess this would be crucial in terms of having land that's available for housing. Another point I wanted to, perhaps back to Mr. Porter on this one, I was interested, the kinds of soils and the topography, I guess you would call it, of the community of North Preston particularly. There's a problem there, I understand, in terms of acceptability or suitability for septic tanks. How does the plan attempt to speak to this very important issue?
Yes, in North Preston, and a major percentage of the community of North Preston is also in the watershed. That is the area in which the soils are least suitable for on-site systems being septic tanks and the normal tile or disposal field. Also, of course, on the other hand, this, by the way, presents difficulties in terms of getting approval for building lots or building permits. And as the soil conditions deteriorate, the larger your lot size becomes, and the lot size may become as large as 5 acres, and this presents great difficulties in someone being able to assemble or find a 5-acre parcel of land. The approach to trying to resolve that question has led to an investigation of central services, in other words, piped water and sewer as a possibility for the community. In fact, because the community is in the watershed, and also because of the need to find buildable land for the community to continue to exist and grow, the need for central services, piped water and sewer, has become as an essential recommendation in the plan.
What about the costs of central water and sewer? Does your plan address yourself to this? What are the costs likely to be substantial for this kind of thing? Who would pay for these costs, for example? Would the area residents be expected to pay for the costs of the water and sewer? Or?
Yeah, I think you've put your question on sort of, or pointed your finger at the bottom line, and that bottom line is at what cost or what costs will be assessed to residents within the community if central water and sewer is installed. Under the present cost-sharing formulas for water and sewer with the provincial level of government, these are not adequate to bring the costs to the residents in the community down to a level where it is affordable. At the same time, these formulas are changing fairly rapidly. So therefore, a case is going to have to be made for special assistance in order to bring the cost of central water and sewer down to an affordable level. In fact, central sewage in North Preston will assist in maintaining the quality of water in Lake Major. One could make the argument that the water utility or the eventual consumers of that water perhaps over a period of time should assist or pay for the cost of services in that community. And the other thing is that we are looking at some new alternative systems, systems which still handle sewage adequately, but are less costly in terms of capital costs. I think that's one of the most important things in the plan, and we have a lot of work to do in order to find funding sources to get those costs down to an affordable level in that community.
Sort of subsidiary to that question, people who are knowledgeable about the communities in this particular area, I think it could be said that these communities, by and large, have been underdeveloped. That really, I guess, maybe some of the authorities who have had responsibility and who have taken initiatives in other communities perhaps have not been as active in these areas as they might have been. I don't know whether you would agree with me on that particular point of view or not. But I think the case might be made that and I guess the real question is, we've talked about the cost of the sewer and so on. There are other things in your plan, I suspect, which speak to changing considerably the conditions as they now exist in these particular communities. And of course that suggests that there are going to be certain costs involved with that. Does your plan attempt to speak to this question in terms of making presenting the historical factors which have led to the conditions as they now exist in the community, and taking into consideration the existing socioeconomic position of the community?
Yes, I think as far as historical factors are concerned, I agree with what you have just mentioned. An example of this is that in the community of North Preston, there is still 25% of the households in that community that do not have inside plumbing. And for a community in this day and age, particularly situated so close to the metropolitan area, to have that percentage of houses still without inside plumbing, I think is an indication that not sufficient attention and perhaps not sufficient assistance has been given in this direction to that community in the past.
We were talking earlier about some important questions that remain to be answered before, and which cause some uncertainty about the plan. I'd be interested in chatting with you about those. I understand that the question of the 107 bypass, for example, is a question that has some very serious implications for the plan. Could you comment on your concerns as regard to the location of the 107 bypass?
Yeah, if I could answer that, and then if I could go back to your previous question, because I don't think I answered it completely. The 107 bypass is related to the communities of Lake Major and the communities of Cherry Brook is a very major consideration. And as far as immediate impact on those two communities, that is the one element that could have potentially the most severe impact. The determination of the final alignment of 107 has been under discussion for several months or years in relationship to the Micmac Rotary problem, and we are hopeful that we will be supplied with information on that alignment in the very near future, because really the plan has progressed to date to the point where certain things are being determined for that area, where potentially one of the alignments for 107 could totally disrupt that planning that has been done to date. So there's a very strong need for information on the alternatives being considered for 107, and more importantly, the community is being given an opportunity to comment and to evaluate on these alternatives, and hopefully to be able to integrate into the plan whatever alignment is decided upon. If I could go back a minute to one of your previous questions, and I think the question related to the fact that the suggested improvements, physical improvements, for example, in the plan involved dollars. And there was a certain level or magnitude of dollars involved in things like water and sewer and road improvements and recreation facilities. This is true, but I think the interesting thing is, and this is one of the other things that the plan attempts to accomplish, really is to, within the communities themselves, once their needs and priorities are known, to have the ability to identify those needs and priorities to government in an organized way, which may be through what is called a plan. But in effect, in many cases, to do nothing more than to take advantage, like all communities are in Nova Scotia, of programs that are already in place. So although we are talking about some additional monies, in many cases we are simply saying that the plan is trying to organize to make use of government assistance programs that are already in place and which other communities in Nova Scotia are using.
Right. This brings us to the question of implementation. I assume that once the plan is finalized and accepted by the municipal and provincial authorities, we have this whole question of implementation. Perhaps back to you, Mr. Johnson, in this regard. I know we talked earlier about this concept of a community development corporation. Perhaps you could comment a bit on how you see the communities, when the plan gets accepted, how you see the communities working to be able to bring into practice some of the things that the plan is suggesting.
Well, I think the communities would have to set up a community development corporation to develop this land between East Preston and North Preston. They'd have to work in close cooperation with one another, because what affects one will affect the other in that regard. And we'll have to go to the governments or the power that be and try and get control of this land, get a deed to the Community Development Corporation to be used for community use in the future.
Right, so the Community Development Corporation then would be a form of structure that would integrate
Yeah,
the...
it would sort of come out of this Joint Action Committee, really structure something somewhat like it or resolve from it.
It would be a mechanism through which the communities can work to oversee the various recommendations that are being suggested in the plan. We only have a very short time left, and perhaps what I'd like to do sometime, if the opportunity presents itself, Mr. Porter, is to have you back and really go into detail. I'm sure many of our viewers would be interested in going into more detail about the plan, the kinds of things. I know we haven't had a chance to talk about the transportation aspects, the recreation aspects. We haven't really had a chance to thoroughly discuss this question of human resource development, which is a very important part of the plan. In the remaining time we have left, your involvement with the communities, I guess you'll remain involved until the plan is accepted, or do you see your involvement as being perhaps going beyond the study stage into the actual implementation stage? And you might also comment in terms of, what remains to be done before the plan does get accepted. I've asked you several questions there, I realize, and I've given you a very short time to answer them.
Right. Well, certainly we will be around and continue to assist in whatever way possible as far as getting the plan finalized, and I mean in that sense a plan which is acceptable to the communities and which the communities are supporting. Once we get to that stage, which hopefully will not be too many more weeks, of course it has to go through the official adoption by the municipality of the County of Halifax and eventually by the Minister of Municipal Affairs, and we will certainly be still involved to that stage. Beyond that stage, the real task begins, the difficult task, and that's related to implementing the plan. And a lot of effort is going to be required. I'm hoping that somewhere along the line I will still be part of that, but the important thing is, and this is the most encouraging thing to me, that the communities, I think, are able to identify this process and realize that even after this plan is formulated, there is an enormous task and a major job to be done in terms to actually carry out its recommendations. And I think, I have no doubts, in fact, that the communities now are accepting this task, and I'm very optimistic in terms of this not being a plan which is shelved somewhere, but actually will bring about things on the ground, and also in terms of human resource development and improvement. And I think the communities, I'm very encouraged by the response from the communities and their determination.
We've got about a minute left. I understand from talking to you as well that these communities, when this plan is accepted, will likely be the first communities in the County of Halifax to have this kind of detailed planning done. Is that correct?
Yes, that's basically correct, and we hope to use that to our advantage in the sense of being able to present to government a concrete plan and a long-term framework, and as you outlined, the only community in Halifax County which hopefully will have an adopted plan in a clear direction.
Well, we've run out of time, gentlemen. I want to thank you both for appearing on the Black Horizons program. That's our program for today. Thank you for watching Black Horizons. See you next time.